This is Here's How, Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast, presented by William Campbell.
Thank you for downloading episode 35 of Here's How. In this podcast, I'll be talking to someone who negotiated the deal to give us the government with no majority, a clutch of independent TDs as ministers, and relying on the opposition to pass legislation.
Here's How is Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast. Make your view heard. Just dial 076 603 5060 and tell the world what you're thinking. Your voicemail may be included in the next podcast. You can find tips on recording your contribution and other ways to contact the show at here'show.ie/call.
On the line now I have Jim O'Callaghan, the new Fianna Fáil TD for Dublin Bay South. Jim, you've been running in elections since 2002. You were elected to Dublin City Council in 2009 and you were successful in the recent Dáil election, as I said. Congratulations as that. You're a senior counsel. You could make a lot of money if you stuck to practising law. What, in one sentence, what motivated you to go into politics?
Well, I'm interested in politics. You're right about stating that I started running in politics in 2002. I suppose what that indicates is that you need a certain amount of perseverance to get elected in Ireland. The one message I would have for people who aren't involved in politics is that we have a system of election in Ireland that is extremely difficult. You know, obviously some people get elected very quickly, but most people, in order to get elected, they have to spend 2 or 3 occasions trying to get elected.
And why did you do that? What was your motivation for that?
Well, as I said to you at the outset, I'm interested in politics. I'm interested in public service. I work as a senior counsel. I enjoy that job very much. But I thought I would like to try to have an involvement in politics in Ireland. It's not something I want to make a career out of. You know, I'm 48 years of age. I'm not looking for it as a career. And I hope to go back and practice full-time as a barrister in the future.
Mm-hmm. One thing that I have to say I'm not entirely clear on, because I've been reading the programme for government and the agreement that you guys have with Fine Gael. I know you were involved in setting that up. Is Fianna Fáil in government or is it in opposition?
In opposition. And in fact, William, it's not a programme for government. The programme for government is the 160-page document that Fine Gael has entered into with a number of the independents who are now in government. We're not in government. What we entered into with Fine Gael was an arrangement, a confidence and supply arrangement in order to facilitate a Fine Gael-led minority government. So we're the main opposition party, but we recognise that we had a role to ensure that the country was provided with a government. The alternative was that it was either to be a Fine Gael-led minority government or an election. Mm-hmm. In the national interest, we thought...
Well, another option would have been a coalition with Fianna Fáil, surely.
Well, yeah, we considered that. We went through the process, and in advance of the election, we said that we wouldn't go into coalition with Fine Gael. We discussed it afterwards. We had a parliamentary party meeting to discuss whether or not we wished to go into a coalition or partnership government with Fine Gael, and it was overwhelmingly rejected.
What was the motivation for that? Why?
Well, a number of reasons. First of all, we'd given a commitment prior to the election that we wouldn't go into government with Fine Gael. I know people can be cynical about political parties. We thought it was important to stick by our pre-election commitment.
Sure, but I'm regressing that one thing there. Why did you give that commitment? Why was that decision made?
The decision was made because we thought that the previous government, which was run by Fine Gael, was a regressive government, and for that reason we wanted to provide the Irish people with an alternative. We wanted to provide them with change, and that's why on 3 occasions we put Micheál Martin before Dáil Éireann for the office of Taoiseach. Unfortunately, we couldn't generate support from outside of Fianna Fáil. We got 43 votes on all 3 occasions, and at that stage we realised, well, listen, we're not going to be able to form a minority government. The only other option available, aside from an election, is a Fine Gael-led minority government. And for that reason, we went into talks with Fine Gael.
Okay, I'm sure I won't press the matter, but I'm sure you understand that if Fine Gael would be so terrible in government with Fianna Fáil, it seems curious that Fine Gael, without any other party, albeit with independence, is more acceptable. But the one thing I'm interested in is this supply and confidence, or confidence and supply arrangement. That I don't think has happened before in Ireland. It has happened in other parliamentary democracies, but for example in 1977 in the UK there was the Lib-Lab Pact. But at that time, the Labour Party had just under 50% of the seats in the British Parliament. The Liberal Party had about 2% of the seats. And that's a completely different size relationship to what you guys have, and it's happened in Australia and New Zealand as well. But every time it's somebody with literally a handful of seats, 3 or 4 seats, supports a government that's just shy of majority. Fianna Fáil has 28% of the seats in the Dáil. Isn't that bizarre that you are keeping in government a party that's only very slightly larger than you?
Well, you don't have to go back to the Lib-Lab Pact to look for an example of a minority government. In fact, in Ireland between 87 and 89, we had a situation where there was a minority government. And you're right, in that situation, Fianna Fáil was just shy of the majority figure.
It was 1 or 2 seats short, yeah.
1 or 2. So this, you're right, is a completely different scenario. But it may be different to what we're used to in Britain or in Ireland. But if you look at other European countries, for instance, if you look at Sweden, at present, you've got the Social Democrats and the Greens in power, and they don't come near having near the 50% of the seats. In other countries, in Scotland previously, Alex Salmon has written about this, they didn't come near to having the full majority. We're going to have to get used to the fact that in Ireland we now have a fractured political makeup, that the Dáil is going to include, into the future in my opinion, a lot of different groups. And because of that, the days of majority rule, whereas Fianna Fáil will get close to 80 or Fine Gael and Labour will get close to majority, those days are over. Mm-hmm. So we're going to have to deal with the fact that we're going to have minority governments. More likely than not, they're going to be a common feature of our governance in the future. And because of that, I think this is an important document to set out the basis for how that could be done in the future.
Okay. I mentioned that you're a senior counsel. That's obviously a job that has the potential to make a lot of money. So clearly you're not, you're in politics to get something done, not to feather your own nest. You could do that better elsewhere. Can you tell me a policy or a couple of policies, that you would want to implement that are completely impossible under a Fine Gael government?
Well, I don't know whether they're completely impossible. I can tell you about policies I'd like to implement that haven't been implemented yet and which aren't in the Fine Gael programme for government. For instance, we have a parole system in this state which isn't based on any statutory grounding. Mm-hmm. It's a system which is completely informal. There is a parole board. There's no rules or regulations set out as to how parole for prisoners is provided. Ultimately, the decision in respect of parole is made by the Minister for Justice on the recommendation of a parole board. Mm-hmm. I think it's inappropriate to have that mix of politics with prisoners and politicians deciding on whether prisoners get parole. And for that reason, one of the things I'm doing at present, I've actually done it, is prepared a parole bill. And that's something I want to put forward. And I think you'll notice in the Dáil in the future that people talk about, will the government be able to get their legislation through? There's going to be greater onus and obligation on opposition parties and opposition TDs as well to come up with their own legislative proposals. Because for the first time in a long time, power in Ireland will reside in Dáil Éireann and not in the cabinet room. And for that reason, I don't think it's all going to be one-way traffic about there's going to be obligations and difficulties for the government. The opposition parties are going to have to be seen to be legislating parties as well.
Sure. So that's just one thing on that, and that's an interesting proposal on the parole board. I would say that it's an important reform. But just, do you genuinely feel that you have a better chance of getting that through by Fianna Fáil not being in coalition?
Well, it's not a question of whether, but I'm sure if we went into coalition with Fine Gael, they'd be agreeable to that. But with respect, I think you're missing the point about why we didn't go into coalition. We gave a commitment prior to the election that we wouldn't.
But that's a circular argument. What's the genesis of that?
Because we did not want to go in with Fine Gael. We told the Irish people that we were going to provide and try to provide an alternative argument. So it's not really a circular argument. We went to the electorate. We said we're going to do X. We're sticking by X, and it is
Well, the electorate rejected X. I mean, you did well in the election, but you didn't come within a mile of a majority.
That's
so
true,
clearly
that's
something
true.
else is going to happen. Would it be
I don't
really
think you can say
dishonourable
that
to say we will achieve as much as possible of what we promised?
Well, we are trying to achieve as much as was in our manifesto. We tried in our confidence supply arrangement with Fine Gael to get as much as our policies in there, and we achieved in that regard. For instance, issues in respect of the increase in rent supplement. That was something that was vigorously opposed by Fine Gael. It's not something that would be required to be done unless we had insisted upon it. We insisted upon it, it's going to happen, and that's something to the benefit of the people who voted for Fianna Fáil. They can see, well, that's as a result of Fianna Fáil's arrangement.
Okay. As you say, you are in opposition, and that is obviously giving you some power in the current arrangement, but less than you might otherwise have. But just looking at the people who are in coalition or who are formally a part of the government, in the sense that they're voting for the Taoiseach rather than abstaining in the vote like Fianna Fáil is. People, for example, like Finian McGrath, who's apparently going to be a health minister, his first priority seems to be promoting smoking in people's workplaces. And you have other people like Michael Lowry. Now, the agreement not the programme for government, the agreement between Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael says to publish all agreements with independent deputies and other political parties in full. Michael Lowry has voted for Enda Kenny as Taoiseach, but there's been nothing published of an agreement. From your knowledge of Michael Lowry, do you really think he's somebody who would do something for nothing?
Well, there's a requirement, whether it's Michael Lowry or any other independent or any other parties, in our arrangement with Fine Gael, that all the agreements will be published in full. You've quoted that. So that's an obligation on the Fine Gael-led minority government.
Are you satisfied it's being honoured?
Well, it hasn't been done as of yet, but it is something that is required to be done. In respect of what you said about Finian McGrath, I think it's slightly unfair to him to say that his first priority is to reintroduce smoking into the workplace. In fairness to him, in talks we had with him, his major issues is issues in respect of facilities for people with cystic fibrosis. He's consistently progressed and advanced those proposals, as he has in respect of other proposals for people with disabilities. So I think it's unfair to criticise him for the issue about smoking that's come up in the media.
But my real point is that to a degree, Fianna Fáil has cleared the pitch, and that's given more power than otherwise would go to people like the Healy-Rae clan, and people kind of laugh at their, I don't know whether it's a cod accent or a real accent, but the Healy-Rae clan, for example, have been at the heart of inappropriate planning in Kerry, to the extent that Kerry is now zoned to house more people than the entire population of Munster. The Healy-Raes, Danny Healy-Rae in particular, has been campaigning in favour of allowing people to drive drunk. I'm sure that has nothing got to do with the pubs that they own. Do you really think that those are appropriate people to have more influence on a government than they otherwise would have?
Well, first of all, I think your comments about them are unfair in terms of seeking to criticise their accents, whether they're real or not.
Well, I don't care, but they promote an anti-urban, anti-sophisticate image of themselves. How true it is not relevant, but the fact is, you would accept these are people who are not appropriate to have a significant influence in government.
Well, first of all, I wouldn't accept that. Secondly, my understanding is they don't have an influence in government. I understand Danny Healy-Rae voted against Enda Kenny as Taoiseach. I also understand that Michael Healy-Rae abstained in the vote as Taoiseach. So they're not part of the government as far as I'm aware. Maybe you know something different.
Well, no, my point is that they have more power than they would if Fianna Fáil was taking an active part either in the government or in the opposition. And I'm sure you understand what I'm getting at here, that it is very unusual for a party of the size and the relative size to the government party. It's very unusual for an arrangement like that Fianna Fáil is doing. And it throws up a suspicion that Fianna Fáil is kind of trying to have its cake and eat it and engineer a political situation whereby most of their political wishes go through, but they still seem to be not to blame for whatever goes wrong.
Well, I think that's slightly unfair. You're correct in stating that the arrangement is unusual, but we're going to have to deal with this into the future. Like, if we had another election, the likelihood is that the vote wouldn't be that materially different. Okay.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
We need to be able to deal with putting together a government from a fractured Dáil. I think there's exciting opportunities that lie ahead because, on many occasions, commentators and politicians have decried the fact that the Dáil has very limited power and the Dáil just rubber stamps what the government of the day wants. Now we're going to have a functioning, active legislature. And, every person elected to Dáil Éireann has a responsibility to play their part in terms of introducing laws. Mm-hmm. So, in a way, and a lot of them, I'm not criticising you, William, a lot of people make the argument this country needs strong government. We need absolute control of government over the Dáil. I don't think that's a good idea. We had that on the last occasion with a huge majority. Issues were railroaded through Dáil Éireann. Mm-hmm. I don't think it provided good government. I think we should give this an opportunity. I know you criticise Fianna Fáil for saying that we should have gone in with Fine Gael, we'd have a majority. Similarly, Fine Gael, Sinn Féin and Labour would have had a majority. There's lots of combinations in Dáil Éireann that could have given
Sure, but the ideological distance between Fine Gael and Sinn Féin is enormous. I'm not really aware of a huge ideological difference between yourselves and Fine Gael.
Well, like Irish politics, if you look at it objectively, most Irish politics is fairly centrist. Mm-hmm. I think that most people would assess that. But the point I'm making to you that there's an opportunity there for a whole variety of combinations to come together. Yeah. I think we need
I have to say, I actually agree with you. I think that there is an opportunity for the Dáil to be an awful lot more meaningful. And I'm just wondering, do you have your priorities right? Because again, looking at the Fine Gael Fianna Fáil agreement, the turnover of Irish Water is 687 million. That's 1/3 of 1% of Ireland's GDP. But exactly 1/3 of your agreement with Fine Gael was about Irish Water. Isn't that completely disproportionate? It's just playing to a populist gallery.
Well, you're right in stating that 2 pages out of the 6 pages.
1/3 of the words, Irish exactly 33% of the words.
Yeah, a third. So I know that 2 pages out of 6 pages is 1/3. The reason for that was that there was a fundamental difference between Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil on the issue of Irish water. Now, it was by no means the most important issue. It is by no means the most important issue facing this country. Health and housing clearly are. But there were issues in respect of Irish water that had to be dealt with. And, the alternative was we just didn't deal with it in the agreement and we let it be dealt with on the floor of the Dáil. In my opinion, that would have resulted in chaos. It would have been bad for the country. And we were better off just trying to iron out in this agreement a way forward to deal with this problem.
Okay. How long do you think it'll last?
Well, the agreement says that it should last up and there'll be a review near the end of 2018. I think it'll last until the end of 2018. Now, maybe you'll be contacting me in a year by now and it won't have lasted. And you'll say, sure, I told you so. But, people need to place some confidence in it. And people need to give the Dáil an opportunity for once in its life to exercise its own power.
That's certainly possible. Jim O'Callaghan, Fianna Fáil TD for Dublin Bay South. Thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you, William.
Make your view heard. Dial 076 603 5060 and leave a contribution for the show. You can find tips on how to record a good contribution and other ways to contact the podcast at here'show.ie/call.
That's almost the end of episode 35 of Here's How, Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast, published on the 18th of May 2016. There's a link to the text of the Fine Gael Fianna Fáil agreement and other information I quoted on this episode's page of the website. If you can think of a topic that you think should be covered, or if you want to suggest someone to include, and that could be yourself, then let me know. If you like the podcast, please go on iTunes and give it a rating or even write a nice review. Also, please like the show on Facebook. Please follow @Here's How Podcast on Twitter. And of course, subscribe to the show. You can use iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, or any other podcast app or software. You can do all of that or get in touch with the show right from www.here'show.ie. The next show will be uploaded on Wednesday, the 24th of May. The Here's How podcast is produced and presented by me, William Campbell. Thank you for listening.